The human warrior moved cautiously through the dense alien forest. His boots crushed the undergrowth beneath him, but the sound was quickly swallowed by the thick air, heavy with the scent of earth and unknown plants. He was alone, at least. That's what he told himself. He had to believe it. For days now he had felt the presence of something, or someone, watching him from the shadows. At first it was nothing but a rustle in the trees, a flash of movement he couldn't quite catch. But as time passed, it became undeniable. Someone, or something, was following him. The hairs on the back of his neck stood up at the thought. The feeling of eyes on him never stopped. The way the wind shifted around him made his instincts scream that he was not alone. The warrior had been on this planet for weeks. It was a wild, hostile world with creatures he had only seen in stories. Dangerous predators lurked in the underbrush, and the skies were home to species of birds that could tear through armor with a single swipe. It wasn't a place for the faint of heart. But he was no stranger to danger. He had fought wars, seen battles that broke lesser men, but nothing ever made him feel as uneasy as the presence he now felt. He paused for a moment, squatting low to the ground. His eyes scanned the surroundings, his senses sharp. There, a faint imprint in the soft dirt, a footprint smaller than his own, barely noticeable. It could have been the wind or a random animal, but his gut told him it was more than that. He straightened, his hand instinctively reaching for the weapon at his side, even though he had yet to see the creature who was tracking him. The warrior's mind raced. He had encountered many alien species during his time as a soldier, but nothing quite like this. There were rumors of a species that lived in the shadows, small yet deadly, always watching, never engaging. They were elusive, hard to track, and impossible to catch. Some said they were a myth, others said they were real, but too dangerous to be seen. Either way, the stories always ended the same. Nobody survived an encounter with them. He wasn't afraid, not exactly. But the thought of being hunted by something he couldn't see, that was unsettling. The warrior wasn't just being followed. He was being hunted, and he knew it. The sun dipped below the horizon and the forest grew darker. A chill ran down his spine. He didn't trust the night. His every instinct screamed at him to move faster, but he had to stay sharp. The smallest mistake and whatever or whoever was following him would strike. As he set up camp, a low whistle of wind tugged at his hair, and he glanced around again but saw nothing. Still, the feeling of being watched remained. He built a small fire, its glow flickering in the dark, casting long shadows over the rocks and trees around him. But it was comforting. A small, warm light in the middle of an overwhelming wilderness. The night air grew colder, the sounds of the forest louder as the hours passed. Every snap of a twig, every rustle in the bushes, made the warrior tense. He thought he heard something behind him, a soft, barely audible step. He turned quickly, but there was nothing there. He had been trained to deal with the unknown, to remain calm, but this was different. He felt the weight of it pressing in, the fear that something was just beyond the reach of the firelight. Waiting. The warrior's hand tightened on the hilt of his blade. The air was thick, his breath visible in the cold. Silence fell over him again, only the crackling of the fire breaking it. He scanned the darkness, hoping to spot even the faintest trace of movement. And then he heard it, a faint rustle. Shift in the air behind him. He spun around just in time to see a shadow dart between the trees. It was small, so small that it could have been a trick of the light, but the warrior knew better. This was no animal. His heart pounded in his chest as he grabbed his weapon, but before he could even think of chasing the shadow, it was gone, melting into the night. He had seen it. A flicker, a blur too quick for his eyes to follow. But it had been there. The warrior stood frozen for a moment, every muscle in his body tense. The silence around him was now oppressive. He knew the stories, the ones that spoke, of creatures that stalked in the shadows, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. But this one was different. There was something in its movements, something deliberate, almost calculated. It was watching him, studying him, and that was what made his blood run cold. He couldn't escape. The feeling that had gnawed at him since he first arrived on this planet was now undeniable. He wasn't alone. He never had been. And whoever, or whatever, it was waiting for the right moment to make its move. The warrior wasn't sure what the creature wanted, but he was certain of one thing. The hunt had begun. The warrior sat by the fire, his eyes flicking nervously between the shadows that danced on the trees around him. The darkness felt alive, like it was closing in, pressing against him from all sides. He had heard the stories about the creatures on this planet, about the Brenka, but he had never believed them. Now, he wasn't so sure. The night was quiet, again, too quiet. His breath came in slow, steady exhales as he tried to shake off the feeling of being watched. The fire crackled softly, its light flickering in the stillness, but every movement in the woods seemed louder than it should have. The rustle of leaves, the snap of twigs beneath invisible feet, all of it seemed amplified, like the entire forest was holding its breath. The warrior kept his hand on the hilt of his blade. He had been trained to react quickly, to defend himself, without hesitation. But this was different. He had faced enemies in battle, but never something that moved like this, never something that could hide so completely. His mind raced, trying to make sense of it. He had heard the whisperings from other soldiers on the base, stories about the Brenka, the tiny trackers who could sneak past the strongest of warriors without leaving a trace. They were a myth to most, a bedtime story for the unknowing. But now, sitting in the dark with only the fire for company, he wasn't so sure. A sudden movement caught his eye. It was a flicker of motion, just a blur against the backdrop of the trees. It was there, and then it was gone. He stood up quickly, his senses sharpening, every nerve in his body on high alert. His eyes scanned the area, darting from one shadow to the next. But there was nothing. Just the wind, carrying the scent of damp earth and pine. He had to be imagining it. He was tired, worn down by the journey and the constant vigilance, but deep down he knew he wasn't imagining it. The tracker was real. He could feel her presence, just beyond the reach of the firelight, her eyes on him as she waited. He took a few steps toward the edge of the clearing, his eyes narrowing as he moved. The wind shifted, carrying the faintest hint of a sound, a soft scraping of metal against stone. His heart skipped a beat. He froze, his gaze snapping to the ground, and there it was, another footprint, smaller than the ones he had seen before, barely noticeable, but unmistakable. A tiny footprint, light and quick, just like the ones that had appeared earlier in the day. His fingers tightened around the hilt of his blade, and he crouched down, studying the print. He could almost hear the soft hum of the alien's movements, so quiet, so deliberate. She was close, very close. The warrior stood up again, every muscle tense. His pulse raced. He had to make a decision. Did he continue hiding in the safety of the fire, hoping she would reveal herself? Or did he go after her, try to find the source of his paranoia before it drove him mad? He wasn't afraid. He had faced worse odds before. But there was something unsettling about this. The Brenka weren't just hunters, they were experts at making their prey feel powerless, like they were always being watched, always being stalked. The warrior wasn't sure if he was ready for that kind of mental game. Still, he couldn't wait forever. So, with a deep breath, he made his choice. Moving swiftly, he extinguished the fire with a quick kick, plunging the clearing into complete darkness. His eyes adjusted to the lack of light, and he moved silently through the underbrush, every step calculated and precise. He kept low, his body blending with the shadows. He moved deeper into the forest, the sound of his footsteps muffled by the thick undergrowth. He could feel the weight of the darkness around him, pressing in from all sides. The air was cooler now, carrying the scent of wet leaves and damp moss. It was almost peaceful, if not for the nagging sense that something was out there, watching, waiting. Every so often he caught a glimpse of something moving in the distance, too quick to fully make out. Was it her? Was it the Brenka? He wasn't sure. But he knew one thing for certain. She was still out there. As he moved through the forest, he noticed the sound of the wind shifting, the trees creaking in response to an unseen force. The forest seemed alive, more so than it ever had before. And then he heard it, the faintest sound like a whisper, barely audible over the rustling of the leaves. He froze in his tracks. It was a voice, soft, barely a whisper, but it was there. The warrior's heart pounded in his chest as he strained to hear. The voice was unfamiliar, but it carried with it a strange, almost melodic quality. The words were not in a language he recognized, but somehow he understood. It was a warning. The sound faded as quickly as it came, but it left a heavy feeling in the air. The warrior didn't move for a long time, his senses screaming that he wasn't alone. He wanted to call out, to demand answers, but something held him back. Something told him that the tracker wasn't ready to reveal herself just yet. He moved cautiously again, this time with more purpose. He couldn't just wait. He had to find her, whatever it took, and then, just as suddenly as the voice had appeared, the forest went silent. The wind stopped. The creatures stopped moving. Even the trees seemed to hold their breath. The warrior's heart thudded in his chest. He couldn't explain it, but he knew. She was close. Very close. The tension hung in the air like a storm waiting to break. He just needed to find her first. The warrior moved through the dark forest, the trees looming over him like silent giants. The sense of being followed had grown stronger, more undeniable with each step he took. His instincts told him he was no longer alone. He had felt her presence earlier, her gaze lingering on him from the shadows, and now, in the thick of the night, he could sense her even closer. The sound of his boots crunching softly on the forest floor was the only thing breaking, the silence. He had extinguished the fire earlier, but even without it, the forest was far from dark. The canopy above let through just enough light from the distant stars, casting an eerie glow over the undergrowth. Every movement around him felt amplified. In the stillness, like the world was waiting, holding its breath. Suddenly, the warrior paused. He could feel it now. Unmistakable. The presence was right there, just beyond the reach of his vision. His eyes darted around, scanning every corner, every darkened spot between the trees, but he saw nothing. The air seemed to thicken with each passing second, the weight of silence pressing against him. He knew that she was close. The tiny tracker was watching him. He could almost hear her breathing, light and quick, blending into the quiet of the night. He hadn't expected to come face to face with her so soon, but in that moment, he knew it was inevitable. The rustling of leaves came from his right, a movement too fast for him to catch, but he knew it wasn't his imagination. He tensed, every muscle in his body coiled and ready. His hand instinctively went to the hilt of his blade, though he didn't draw it. Not yet. Then, just as quickly as it had appeared, the rustling stopped. Silence flooded the air again, thick and unsettling. The warrior held his breath, waiting for any sign of movement. He didn't dare make a sound. He couldn't afford to give himself away. But then, a soft voice, barely above a whisper, reached his ears. "You've been waiting." The words were not in any language he recognized, yet he understood them completely. There was no confusion. It was as if his mind had somehow bridged the gap between their two worlds. The voice was calm, serene even, but there was a definite sense of something more. A warning, perhaps, or a challenge. The warrior remained still, his pulse quickening. "Why do you follow me?" he asked, his voice a low growl. The words felt strange on his tongue, as if he were speaking in a foreign tongue. He knew the creatures of this planet spoke in ways that could only be understood by those attuned to their world. But there was something in his gut that told him this conversation would go far beyond simple words. The silence stretched out, and, just when he thought she might not respond, he heard a soft laugh. The sound was unexpected, light and playful. Yet there was something deeper beneath it, a complexity he couldn't quite grasp. "I am not the one who follows," she replied, her voice almost musical. The words were clear now, as though they were meant for him to understand. "I am the one who watches." The warrior's brow furrowed. "Watches?" he repeated. "Why?" Her voice shifted, carrying a different tone now, one that was full of mystery and meaning. "To understand. To learn." The warrior took a step forward, his heart racing. He could feel the faint stir of movement in the air, the sensation of being watched from the shadows. It was as if the forest itself held its breath. "I don't understand," he muttered, his mind racing. "What do you want with me?" Her laughter faded, replaced by a soft sigh. "What is it you seek in the dark?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "What is it you fear?" The warrior's grip on his blade tightened. He had faced many challenges in his life, but this was unlike anything he had ever encountered. The idea of a creature so small, so hidden, yet so full of power, unsettled him. "I'm not afraid of you," he said firmly, though there was a doubt creeping into his mind. He had faced worse things than this, surely. But the question lingered in his mind, gnawing at him like a persistent itch. What did she want from him? From the shadows, a pair of eyes gleamed, catching the faintest light. The warrior froze. They were not the eyes of any animal. These eyes were too intelligent, too aware, and then, without a sound, the figure stepped out from the darkness. She was small, no taller than his waist, but her presence was undeniable. The creature before him was unlike anything he had seen before. She wore no armor, but her skin seemed to shimmer in the dim light, a pale shade that seemed to blend with the surrounding darkness. Her features were sharp, elegant, almost regal. She moved with the grace of a predator, and yet there was no malice in her gaze, only calm curiosity. The warrior's breath caught in his throat. He had heard of the Brenka, but seeing one in person, up close, it was nothing like he had imagined. Her eyes met his, and for a moment he felt a strange sense of calm. It wasn't the kind of calm you would expect from a predator or an enemy, but the kind of calm that made you feel like you were being seen for the first time. She stepped closer, her tiny frame barely making a sound. There was no weapon, no aggression, just the strange, silent power that came from being a part of this world. "I am not here to harm you," she said, her voice soft, yet clear. "I am here to offer you something." The warrior didn't move. His hand remained on his blade, but now the tension felt different. She had offered something, he wasn't sure. What? But he knew the weight of her words. The silence stretched again, thick and heavy, but now it wasn't as oppressive. The warrior didn't know what to expect, but he felt an odd pull to listen. "What is it that you offer?" he asked, his voice low. Her eyes glowed faintly in the dark. "A bond." The warrior stood motionless as the tiny creature before him spoke. Her words hung in the air like a riddle, impossible to ignore. A bond? What kind of bond? He had been on this planet for weeks, trying to survive, trying to find a way off this hostile world. And now, in the darkness of the forest, this small alien was offering something that felt more like a trap than an alliance. He couldn't quite make sense of it. His mind raced, but his instincts told him not to act in haste. His hand still gripped the hilt of his blade, but he didn't draw it. The creature hadn't shown any sign of aggression, and there was something in her eyes, something he couldn't place, that kept him from striking first. "A bond?" he asked, his voice a little sharper than he intended. "Why would you offer me that?" The tiny tracker took a step closer, her eyes never leaving his. There was no fear in her gaze, only an unwavering confidence that unsettled him. She didn't seem to care that he was a human warrior, someone trained to fight and survive against the odds. In her eyes, he was just another being, another piece in a much larger puzzle. "It is not a simple thing," she replied softly, her voice calm, yet filled with a depth of meaning he couldn't quite understand. "A bond between us, between humans and my people, is not just a pact. It is a connection, one that can change everything, for both of us." The warrior's mind reeled. His thoughts were clouded with suspicion. His every instinct told him to be cautious. What did she mean by change everything? He had seen plenty of alliances forged in the heat of battle, but none had been like this. None had involved something so personal. A bond between their species? It seemed too strange, too dangerous to consider without understanding it fully. He stepped back slightly, his eyes scanning her tiny form again. She was small, but she didn't look weak. Her posture was too graceful, too composed. He could see the strength in her, the kind of strength that came from being born into a world where survival was everything. "I don't trust easily," he said, his voice low, but not without honesty. He wasn't sure if it was a warning or a statement of fact. But it was the truth. He had learned the hard way that trust was a luxury few could afford, especially on alien worlds like this one. The tiny tracker tilted her head slightly, as though considering his words carefully. "You do not have to trust me," she said. "Trust is not the same as understanding. And understanding is the key to this bond." The warrior frowned. "Understanding? How can I understand something I don't even know about?" The tracker's eyes softened slightly, though there was still that quiet strength in her gaze. "That is the purpose of the bond," she replied. "To show you what you do not know, to make you see the world as I see it." The warrior's mind raced again. The idea of seeing the world through the eyes of this tiny alien, to experience the forest the way she did, to understand her people's way of life, it was a tempting thought, but at the same time, it felt wrong, dangerous. He had spent so much of his life fighting, trusting only what he could see and to, and now she was asking him to give that up for something he couldn't fully comprehend. "Why me?" he asked, the question escaping before he could stop it. "Why offer this bond to a human like me?" The tracker's lips twitched slightly, as though she were amused by his confusion. "Because you are not like the others," she said simply. "You are different. You have fought beside us in other battles, though you do not remember. Your people and mine share a history, one that goes beyond this planet, beyond this moment. The bond was always meant to be." The warrior's eyes widened slightly. "What do you mean, fought beside us?" he asked. He had never fought alongside any alien species, at least, not consciously. His memory of past battles was clouded, filled with the haze of time and conflict, but she didn't answer his question directly. Instead, she stepped even closer, so close now that he could feel the soft brush of her presence. She was tiny, but somehow she felt like more than just a physical being. There was an energy to her, an aura that radiated from her as though she existed in two worlds at once. "The bond will give you the answers you seek," she said, her voice soft but filled with a strange power. "It will show you what has been hidden from you, what you have forgotten." The warrior's heart raced. What was she talking about? What had been hidden from him? He hadn't forgotten anything, had he? The memories of his past were muddled, but they weren't gone. Were they? He shook his head slightly, trying to clear the fog that was clouding his thoughts. His instincts told him to run, to get away, before things got any stranger. But something inside him held him in place. The pull of her words, the weight of her presence. It was too strong to ignore. "You offer me answers," he said, his voice hoarse. "But what do you want in return?" The tiny tracker looked at him with those piercing eyes, her expression unreadable. "Nothing," she replied simply. "The bond is not about what I want. It is about what we both need. To survive. To understand." The warrior hesitated. He could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on him. If he accepted this bond, there would be no going back. He would be connected to her people, in a way that would change everything. He didn't know if he was ready for that. He didn't know if he could handle the truth that this bond might reveal, but the darkness around him seemed to grow heavier, the forest closing in as if waiting for his choice. He took a deep breath, his hand still resting on his blade, but not drawing it. This was no longer just about survival. This was about something deeper, something that stretched beyond the battlefield. "Show me," he said, his voice low. "Show me what you mean." The tracker nodded, a small, knowing smile on her face. She had been waiting for this. The forest seemed to hold its breath as the tiny tracker stepped back, her gaze still fixed on the warrior. Her presence filled the air, pulling him in, urging him to follow her. His mind was still reeling from her words, the bond she had spoken of, the history between their species, the promise of answers. He couldn't shake the feeling that everything he thought he knew was about to change. The warrior stood motionless for a moment, his heart racing. His instincts screamed at him to walk away, to flee the situation before it went any further. But he couldn't. There was something about her, about this strange encounter, that kept him rooted to the spot. His curiosity outweighed his fear. The tracker tilted her head slightly as though sensing his hesitation. She didn't push him to move. Instead, she simply waited, standing there with a quiet, patient confidence that made him feel as if time itself had slowed. "I'm not like you," he finally said, his voice a low murmur. "I don't understand what you're offering, this bond. I don't even know what it means." The tracker's eyes softened, her expression unreadable but calm. She stepped closer again, but this time she didn't stop just at the edge of his reach. She came within an arm's length, her tiny figure almost blending into the shadows that surrounded them both. "The bond isn't something you can explain with words," she said softly. "It's something you feel. Something you know deep inside." The warrior frowned, his mind trying to wrap itself around her words. She had been speaking in riddles since they first met, but this felt different. She wasn't just offering an alliance. She was offering a connection, a deeper understanding of the world, of their species, and perhaps even of himself. He wasn't sure he was ready for that. The idea of seeing the world through her eyes was both intriguing and terrifying. What truths might he uncover? What parts of himself might be exposed? "You say it's something I'll feel?" he said, his voice steady but filled with doubt. "But what if I can't? What if I can't handle it?" The tracker's gaze remained unwavering. "You can. You already have." Her words struck him like a sudden realization, but it didn't make any sense. He had never felt anything like this before. There was no connection, no bond between them, not until now. "Everything you've experienced here," she continued, her voice barely more than a whisper, "has led you to this moment. You were always meant to find me. You were always meant to know this." The warrior's chest tightened. He felt the weight of her words settle on him, heavy with meaning. "I don't understand," he said, the words coming out more as a plea than a statement. The tiny tracker took a slow step forward, close enough now that he could feel the warmth of her presence, though she remained small and delicate before him. Her hand rose almost as if in a gesture of peace, and she touched his arm lightly. The warrior tensed at the touch, but it was gentle, almost comforting. "The bond will show you things you've forgotten," she said quietly. "Things that were taken from you. Things that will help you understand why you're here. Why we're both here." The warrior's mind raced. Forgotten things? What could she mean? His memories were full of gaps, bits of past battles, flashes of faces, voices, but they were all fragments, not enough to piece together a full picture. He had always thought of it as the cost of war, the price of survival. But now, with the tracker's words echoing in his mind, he wondered if there was something more to it. "I don't remember," he said, the frustration evident in his voice. "I don't remember anything important." The tracker's eyes glinted in the darkness, reflecting a flicker of something, knowledge maybe, or understanding. "The bond will help you," she repeated. "It will unlock what has been sealed away." The warrior didn't know what to say. He couldn't even fully grasp what she was offering. The words unlock and sealed away sounded ominous, as though there was something buried deep inside him that he wasn't meant to know, or perhaps something he wasn't ready to face. His heart pounded as the silence stretched between them. He didn't want to admit it, but he was afraid. The thought of unlocking forgotten memories, of facing things he had buried in his past, it was terrifying. "I can't promise I'll accept this," he said, his voice steady but full of uncertainty. "I don't know if I'm ready." The tracker studied him for a moment, her gaze unwavering. She seemed to consider his words carefully before speaking again, her voice gentle but firm. "You don't have to be ready," she said. "You just have to choose. The bond will not force you, but it will always be here, waiting." She stepped back then, leaving a small distance between them. The air around them seemed to pulse with an unseen energy, as though the world itself was holding its breath, waiting for the warrior's decision. The warrior's mind was a whirlwind of thoughts. He didn't know what to do, what to believe. The idea of joining with this tiny alien, of sharing a bond that went beyond anything he had ever known, felt like it would change everything. It was overwhelming, and yet deep down, something inside him told him that this was the moment that could answer all the questions, that could unlock the mysteries that had been clouding his past. But could he handle it? Could he handle the truth? He looked at her, really looked at her for the first time, small, delicate, yet undeniably strong. She had been watching him, waiting for him to make a choice, and now that choice was before him. With a deep breath, he made his decision. "I'll trust you," he said quietly. The tracker's eyes softened. There was no smile, no joy, just a quiet understanding between them. She had waited for this moment, and now it was finally here. "Then we begin," she said. The moment the warrior spoke those words, a strange, quiet pulse seemed to fill the air around them. It wasn't loud, but it was undeniable. He could feel it, an almost electric charge that hummed just beneath his skin. The bond had begun. The tiny tracker didn't say anything in response. She simply stood there watching him with those unblinking eyes, her presence still calm and unwavering. It was as if she had known all along that this moment would come, that he would finally make the choice to accept what she was offering. There was no joy, no sense of triumph on her face, just the quiet certainty that this was the right path. The warrior's heart thudded in his chest, his breath coming faster as he felt the bond begin to take shape. It wasn't painful, but it was intense, like something was being drawn from deep within him, something he hadn't known was there. A part of him wanted to pull away, to resist, but he knew he couldn't. It was too late for that. He had chosen. He closed his eyes, trying to focus on the strange sensations. He didn't understand it, but it was happening. He felt as though the forest around him was coming alive, like the trees and the very earth beneath his feet were shifting, reacting to the bond forming between him and the tracker. In the darkness of the forest, everything seemed to slow down, the sounds of the night fading into the background. There was only the rhythmic beat of his heart and the soft hum of the bond. It was as if the world had narrowed, and all that mattered now was the connection between them. The warrior had no idea what to expect, but he knew one thing for sure. His life was never going to be the same again. The tracker stepped closer, and though she was small, her presence felt much larger now, like she was filling up the space between them with a force he couldn't comprehend. Her hand reached out, and the warrior didn't flinch. He allowed her to touch his arm, the soft pressure of her fingers sending a wave of warmth through him. "Are you ready?" Her voice was soft, but it carried the weight of something important. The warrior nodded slowly, though he wasn't entirely sure what he was ready for. He wasn't sure if he could be prepared for what was about to happen. Then, without another word, she closed her eyes. The warrior could feel the change then, like something was shifting deep within him. The bond, the connection. It was no longer just a feeling. It was something he could see. It wasn't visible in the usual sense, but he could sense it, as though it had always been there, buried beneath the surface. In that instant, he saw flashes, brief, fragmented images. They weren't his own memories, but they felt as real as his own. He saw the tracker's world, the vast forests where she had lived, the creatures of her planet, moving in ways that were so different from what he had known. He saw the struggle of her people, the silent war that had raged for generations, a fight for survival that none of them could avoid, and then he saw himself. The warrior was not just a soldier, not just a man trying to survive on a strange planet. He was part of something much bigger. He saw himself in other places, other times, fighting beside the tracker's people, standing shoulder to shoulder with her ancestors in battles long past. His heart raced as the memories washed over him, the details flooding his mind faster than he could process them. The images came and went in quick bursts, like flashes of lightning illuminating the sky, and then just as quickly they would fade, leaving him with an overwhelming sense of loss. What was it? What was this feeling that made his chest tighten, made his breath catch in his throat? Was it regret? Was it guilt? And then, suddenly, he understood. The bond wasn't just about connecting with her or her people. It was about understanding the past, the hidden truths, the things that had been buried for so long. The warrior hadn't just been following the tracker. He had been part of this story for much longer than he had ever known. The past battles, the history between their species, it was all coming to light now. The warrior had been part of this fight, part of their shared struggle. But in his own world, in his own time, he had forgotten. The memories had been lost, hidden away, but now with the bond, they were coming back. Slowly, piece by piece, his mind was piecing together the story that had been lost to him. He opened his eyes, and for a brief moment, the forest seemed to shimmer with the faint glow of forgotten memories. The air felt charged, alive with the weight of what he had just seen, what he had just remembered. He wasn't alone in this fight, not anymore. He understood now. The bond was a connection to something greater, a history that had been hidden, a battle that had been fought long before his arrival. And now, it was his fight too. The tracker was still standing beside him, her hand still on his arm, her eyes closed as though she were sharing in the moment with him, feeling the same things he had felt. There was no need for words now. The bond spoke for itself. It was an unspoken understanding, a silent promise that whatever came next, they would face it together. The warrior didn't know what to do next. The memories, the knowledge, the weight of it all. It was overwhelming. He felt as though his mind was racing, trying to catch up with everything he had just learned. But through it all, one thing was clear. He couldn't turn back. The bond had been made, and there was no going back from it. Whatever future lay ahead, it was now intertwined with the tiny tracker's fate. And for the first time since his arrival on this strange world, the warrior didn't feel quite so alone. The forest was still. Too still. The warrior could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him, heavier than the dense air around him. His heart was racing, but there was no fear now, not like before. He had accepted the bond, and with it, everything had changed. The memories, the connection, it was all still fresh in his mind, like a flood of images and sensations that had been hidden for so long. The past battles, the silent wars fought, alongside the tracker's people, the shared struggle against forces he had never fully understood. But now, he did. Now, he was part of that fight. He wasn't just a soldier stranded on a foreign world anymore. He was part of something much bigger. The warrior glanced at the tiny tracker standing beside him. She was silent, her eyes still, closed as though she were experiencing the same flood of memories, the same weight of knowledge. But unlike him, she seemed calm. Her stillness was a contrast to his racing thoughts. He felt the connection between them, like an invisible thread that had been woven between their souls. It was stronger now, undeniable. The bond had shown him what he had forgotten, what had been taken from him. He understood now why he had been brought to this planet. It wasn't by chance. The battles he had fought, the wars he had survived, it had all led him here, to this moment, to her. The warrior took a deep breath, his eyes meeting the tracker's. He didn't need to speak. The bond allowed them to communicate in a way that words never could. She knew what he was feeling, just as he knew what she was feeling. It was a strange kind of understanding, one that didn't require explanation. He had never been one for destiny, never believed in the idea that things were meant to happen. But now, with the memories of the past flooding his mind, he couldn't deny the pull. He had been part of the fight long before he had ever set foot on this planet. His role in this story was not by accident. It had always been part of the plan. For the first time since he had arrived, the warrior felt a sense of purpose. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about something bigger. The war was far from over. The bond had connected him to the tracker and her people, but it had also connected him to the enemy. He could feel it now. The forces that threatened this world, the dangers that loomed just beyond the horizon. They were coming. He knew what he had to do. The tracker opened her eyes and their gaze met once more. There was no need for words. They both understood. The path ahead would be difficult, but they would face it together. They had been given a second chance, a chance to fight for something greater than themselves. The warrior stepped forward, his hand still resting on the hilt of his blade. It felt different now. The weight of it was familiar, but it wasn't just a weapon anymore. It was a symbol of the bond they shared, a symbol of the fight that lay ahead. The tracker stood beside him, her presence grounding him, reminding him that he was not alone. They were in this together. He took another step, feeling the earth beneath his feet, the soft crunch of leaves and twigs. The bond between them was stronger now, pulling him forward. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew one thing for certain. He was no longer just a soldier on a foreign world. He was part of something much larger. The fight wasn't over. It had just begun. The forest seemed to open up before him, the path ahead clear, yet filled with uncertainty. But he wasn't afraid. With the tracker by his side, he was ready for whatever came next. They would face it together, their bond a strength that neither could deny. As they walked side by side, the warrior couldn't help but feel a strange sense of peace. The future was uncertain, but for the first time since he had arrived on this planet, he wasn't alone. The tracker's presence beside him was a reminder that he was part of something bigger, something that stretched beyond the present. They had been brought together for a reason, and now they would fight as one. The path ahead was long, and the road would be filled with dangers and challenges. But the warrior wasn't afraid anymore. He knew that whatever came next, he would face it with the tracker by his side. Together, they would fight for their survival, for the survival of both their species. And as they moved deeper into the forest, the warrior knew that this was just the beginning. The bond had been made, and nothing could break it. Not now. Not ever. The warrior and the tracker walked forward into the darkness, their path illuminated not by fire or light, but by the unspoken promise of what they would face together.